evening, everybody. It is Wednesday night and we are talking maths this evening. Yes, thinking with numbers. We're wanting to uncover this particular subject. Some people find it really daunting. Other people love mathematics and it's what they do all day, every day. And I think for lots of children, this subject has become their, let's say it's their foe, not so much their friend. And we want to really try and help you parents to navigate the subject at home. Specifically when it comes to doing homework. And I know during COVID, many parents were doing homeschooling, or what I like to call crisis schooling, and you were having to talk to teachers and get the work from the teachers and then try and, I suppose, teach your child. And maths was one of the things that parents dreaded getting the most. So good evening, and like I said, my name's Philippa Fabry. I'm an education consultant here in Port Elizabeth, and I am one of the founding directors at Elson Academy. And the reason why I chose this particular subject is because parents put a lot of emphasis on getting their children to read. And they like to say that they've exposed their children to reading early on so that when they start school, they can already read. But we seem to neglect maths. And children, I suppose the first time a child is ever exposed to number is when they learn to show you on their hands how old they are. And you can say to a little toddler, "How old are you?" And they can say 1 or 2. And that's the first really exposure that they get to numbers. But they don't always generally have a concept of that number. And here's a little video I want to play just to show you, before I introduce my guest Danny this evening, I want to just show you what that actually looks like in a little toddler when he is asked to count higher.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7, and 8.
All right, can you count higher than that?
I can count higher like this. 1, 2, 3, 4.
And I think that is just exactly what we are trying to explain this evening, is the concept of number, the concept, the vocabulary, all those areas that fall under the banner of mathematics, which we're going to unpack this evening. But I'd like to introduce a friend, a colleague, a sister, who I have come to know over many, many years. We were in an organization called SALED, about 12 years back, if not more. And Danny and I have really, we've kind of grown together as remedial therapists here in Port Elizabeth. So I'd like to introduce you to a good friend of mine, Dr. Danny Ahing. Hi, Danny. Welcome.
Hi, Phil. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me here.
It's so nice to share the platform with somebody. It's always nice to be able to have somebody that can fill in the gaps with me, because it's not, you never stop learning in terms of education and in terms of what kids are having to do and the learning challenges that children have. And it's always so nice to have somebody to bounce ideas off and to kind of look at a certain challenge that a child might be having and say, why do you think this is happening, or what can I do to help? So between you and I, we're going to unpack this very, very complex subject. And I think of maths, I don't know if you agree with me, Dan, but I think of maths as a house, with the foundations of the house being those concrete structures that have to be solid and strong. And those are the concepts that the child learns in grades 1, 2, and 3. Those basic rudimentary aspects of maths. And then moving on to sort of the walls of the house, and topics build onto those fundamental structures, and then moving on to the roof of the house, where we're talking more abstract concepts, and we've moved away from concrete to semi-concrete to the abstract. And as you know, if your foundations are not strong and if your foundations are shaky, your whole house is going to be a little bit full of cracks and it's going to wobble around a lot. So I think in terms of maths challenges, we're going to unpack those four. We're going to unpack 4 areas that are the components of the subject mathematics. And jumping right in, because we are short of time, I'm going to start with one that we all love to hate, and that's tables and bonds. So when a child has to start learning tables and bonds, and they've got to know the facts of 2 times 1 and 2 times 2 and 2 times 3 and 2 times 4, and so it goes on. And they've got to learn their bonds, so that's their plus bonds, and then their times tables. And that we would hope becomes automatic, that the child can literally rattle off their tables and bonds. But this doesn't always happen, and they really struggle. They don't know their tables and bonds, they can't learn their tables and bonds, and they need to use counters, or they need to use whatever aids they have when they ask those particular subjects. So what would you say, Dan, in order to help with parents if they are worried about their child not being able to learn those tables and bonds, that they don't, so it doesn't become fluent? How would you suggest parents help with that?
I think parents must count. They must count everything with their kids. Let their kids count. It doesn't actually matter whether it's little bottle tops, whether it's pegs. Parents mustn't go out and buy expensive things. Use what you've got at home, and let the kids count. If your child is in the bath, let them count the tiles in the bath. If they are only
Use what you have
capable-
around you.
Exactly. Make use of what you have, because I think that's, parents are often quite intimidated by, I have to be able to help my child, but I'm not a teacher, but where do I get all of these things? And then they rush off, and often there's a lot of guilt buying. So they'll go off into a toy shop, for example, or an educational shop, and they'll buy a lot of things that they actually don't know what to do with. So rather use what you've got at home and count using everything that you can. These little blocks, I just want to show you. These are little wooden blocks that are probably about 25 years old. And they're just offcuts. They're just wood offcuts. These I've actually painted 1 million years ago when dinosaurs ruled the earth, and I've got a whole lot of them. So the kids can count pebbles, they can count buttons, stones, whatever it is that they can have in more than 10, for example, because you're going to let them split that up eventually. And I think that
Yeah.
it's the practical component of it.
Yeah, and I think
that
parents need to
repetition.
understand. Parents need to understand as well that they don't need in a grade one, for a grade one child, they don't need to be able to count and understand number concept up to 100. I think in grade one it's up to 20. It might even be up to 50. I'm not 100% sure, but the curriculum chunks the work so that they have to have understanding of number up to a certain level, I suppose. I think in grade 2 it's 100, and in grade 3 it might be 500. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if there are any teachers watching, but I definitely know that parents want to try and get their kids to, I'm going to get my child to count up to 1,000 or get up to, it makes no difference if they can rote count. They can count up to 1 million if they want to, but if they don't understand what they're actually doing, it's really just a waste of time, isn't it?
Sure. Well, the
They've
other
got to
thing as well
understand.
is, I don't think parents are aware of the fact that you have, when you're doing counting, you have multiples, you have skip counting, and then you have normal counting 1, 2, 3. So the multiples are 1 times 2 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4. But skip counting is where you ask the child to count in twos, but they must start at 5. So if they haven't developed a very strong number sense, if they haven't mastered the concept of what a number
Counting
is
on.
and what the values are, they can't count on. So you might ask them to add 4 plus 3. So they can tell you that's 4 if you ask them. But when they've got to say 4 plus 3, they'll count everything instead of counting
From
on, as
one.
you say. So it'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 instead of 4, 5, 6,
I've got
7.
4 and then 3 more. Yeah,
Yes.
that's the next level again. It's kind of starting with the basics and then moving on to the next. I see there's a comment saying that in grade 2 they have to know numbers up to 200 and up to 1,000 in grade 3. So it's pointless getting your grade 1 child to count up to 200 if they don't really understand the first part, which is up to, I think it's up to 50. But yeah, so I think, and if I have to look at the high school child, and again, following on with what Danny's saying, being able to skip count, being able to identify where is 358 in 1,000 grid. So if I look at 1,000 grid board, I need to be able to know where 358 is, and then maybe count on in fives from 358. Or count backwards from 570, count backwards in tens, or count backwards in twos, or whatever. That is that if they cannot do that in their heads, then they need to be doing that on a number grid, because trying to do that with your fingers is not going to help. So I would say fingers would be the concrete stage, looking at a grid is the semi-concrete stage, and then being able to do that in your head, where you visualize that number grid in your head, and doing it in your head is the abstract stage. So you've kind of got to look at where your child is at to know, are they concrete, are they semi-concrete, or are they abstract? The other thing is tips and tricks, like if the 11 times table is causing them some grief, you've got to teach them, look, 11, 22, 33, 44, it's double digits. So when you're doing your 11 times tables, you just have to know 11 times 11 times 1 is 11, 11 times 2 is double that, 22, 11 times 3 is, and then it's 33 and 44 and 55, and things like that. There are all kinds of little tricks that you can do. I mean, you just Google things on YouTube to see these raps that kids have come up with to be able to remember their times tables, all these little songs and rhyming games and things like that. And the other thing is, if you know that 7 times 5, let's say, is 35, if you know that 7 times 5 is 35, then 7 times 6, you just add another 5 onto that. So it's 35 plus another 6, or whatever it is. So you start with what you know. Always start with what you know, and then build from there. Go.
Sorry, I just wanted to add in and link to what you've said now, specifically for teachers here, because this causes a lot of confusion with kids. When teachers are teaching multiples of 10, or teaching multiplied by 100 or multiplied by 1,000, please don't tell the children, if a child is struggling specifically, do not tell them they must count the number of noughts and add it on the back of a number. So if it's 5 times 100 and the child is struggling with understanding that concept of making that 5 100 times bigger, don't say to the child, count how many noughts are after the 1 and add them to the 5, because 5 plus naught stays 5. So the child doesn't actually understand that you are making that number 100 times bigger. And that is a problem that a lot of children struggle with, because teachers, I think, become so desperate. How am I going to help this child to understand this? Okay, let's just do it this way around. And that compounds, because when they get to the higher grades, they really struggle with number concept. And we say, but this child's at high school. How can they not understand place values? And that especially becomes problematic when you're dealing with decimals, because of the place values. And now you've added these noughts, and what comes before and after the decimal sign.
Yeah, and I think getting them to make use of a calculator as well. I don't have a problem. I don't know how you feel about a calculator, but I think having a calculator nearby to at least help them to check their answers. So use the calculator as a tool to correct, to make sure that you're on the right track. There's also the issue about attention and memory. And I think this affects children as well, because if your memory is poor, you won't always remember the steps in a sum. So you might know your times table today, but tomorrow, or let's say you learned your two times table on Monday, on Friday or on Thursday when you're writing your little test, you've forgotten, so you don't retain that information. And I think the most important thing for parents to understand is that memory is only as good as the practicing and the revision and the drilling, and not to try and do homework late at night. I think that also causes parents a lot of stress, is they come home from work 5, 6 o'clock, they're doing supper, and now 8 o'clock it's coming to try and do homework. And that doesn't always end well, especially if it's maths. Your brain at 8 o'clock at night is not fresh. So I would certainly suggest that maths is done early on in the day, if at all possible, that we don't do maths last thing before bed at night. I don't know if there are any questions about that, but please send your questions in. We can deal with them as we go along. So please, if you have any questions in terms of tables and bonds and helping your children to remember those basic number patterns, that's the first little section that we're dealing with. The second section that we're dealing with has to do with your operations. So the procedures that we teach our children when they are doing math. So obviously it's addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, and they need to know which procedure to do when, and they need to know what plus means. They need to know what sum of means. They need to know minus, subtract, less than, more than, share. These are all the sort of vocabulary that comes in when we are dealing with operations. So if a child is struggling with the methodology, the operations in terms of not knowing how now, it's not the what now, we're moving to the how. They don't know how to do a sum. They struggle to remember the rules. They struggle to remember the steps, especially in a sum, a long division or a long multiplication sum. And they really struggle to remember rules. For example, area is length times breadth. Or when you're rounding off numbers, you need to do whatever. So Danny, for a primary school child, how would you help a parent if the child is struggling with operations?
I'd like to just go back with regards to using a calculator. I think a calculator is incredible. It can give the child a lot of confidence if they know how to use it. And that is very important, because young kids need to have a very basic calculator. And moms and dads, please, if possible, try not to let them use your cell phone, because there are far too many other things on there that can distract them. So try and get
Good
them
point.
just a basic common garden gnome little cheap calculator that they can use and play with. And together with that, because you can give them the calculator, but if they don't know how to operate it, then it serves no purpose. It's like an open book test and you can't find the answers, because that adds to the anxiety, which is linked to doing homework late at night. That, again, back to the mathematical language, all of these things just compound the child's problem. Because if you, and we have discussed this, Phil, if you ask a child to calculate an answer, many of them will add it, because they assume, for whatever reason, that calculate means add. So they need to understand the different. Add means plus,
Terminology.
means put it together. That terminology is vitally important. And I think we definitely underestimate little children, because they are exposed to fractions long before they even go to play school. If you've got twins, for example, and you buy one chocolate and you tell them to share it, you don't break it in half. You give it to one of them and you say, share it. I promise you, they will make sure that they get exactly the same. I know, because my kids do that. I have one child who will take a ruler, and I love you, my darling, but she will measure and she'll make exactly sure that everybody gets that they get the same. And they will tell you, those little pickies will have a look and they'll say, but he's got more than what I have. His piece is bigger than. That's mathematical language. Those are terminologies they're going to be using later in life. So they're already aware of it.
Yes.
And when they get to school level, for whatever reason, that goes out the
They
window.
they lose that. It's because we don't bring it back to real life situations. We don't use problems that they have been exposed to before. So whenever there's sort of like a sum that they don't really understand, use the same numbers, but use a different story around it. But we're jumping ahead because story sums come later.
Comes next.
But in terms of the operations, there's really plus, minus, times, divide. And there are the methods that go along with that. Now, what happens if teacher's teaching one method and mom knows another method and child knows a third method? What would you suggest there?
It's very difficult for a child to explain to a parent, this is how my teacher wants us to do it. It does vary from school to school. So for parents to ask the child, the younger they are, the more difficult it is. The vocabulary they have is far greater than what they can express. So they can't always explain, this is how we've got to do it in class. So mom and dad will explain it how they've understood it and how they've been taught it. And that was very long ago. And everything has changed. So they try and help the child, and then the child goes back to school and then comes back and they're in a state because, it
She
wasn't, I
said
didn't
it's
do it like I
wrong.
was supposed to.
Yeah.
But, and then mom or dad will say, but the answer's right. So my recommendation is that parents make an appointment, or you don't even need to go into the schools nowadays. Just have a WhatsApp
Email.
call or an email. Please, can you explain to us how do we do long multiplication?
Long division,
How do
yeah,
we
yeah.
set? Yes, because if they, like we've said as well, when I've discussed this, if there are sums that have got multi-steps to them, it could, in the higher grades, they could end up having a sum that is worth 8 marks. But they can get the answer, but they've skipped steps out. So they're not going to get the, exactly. So they're not going, and the brighter kids tend to do that, because I think it's important also that moms and dads are aware of the fact that it's not only children that are struggling holistically in an academic environment. There are exceptionally bright children that also struggle with maths, but because they're bright, we tend to think they can cope. That's not always the case.
Yes.
So just to be aware, ask the teacher, how is this supposed to be set out? Can you give us an example? And teachers the majority of them are always willing to help if parents are prepared to give them the support they need.
Here's a question from Roxanne. Hi, Roxanne. Nice to see you. My son grasps other operations well, even more complex concepts like fractions and place value are no problem, but he struggles with subtraction. Any advice on foundations that may be missing? The best method I can go back and teach. Apparently, mom is a dinosaur. So in terms of subtraction, I presume she's talking about the one underneath each other columns. The columns, the subtraction columns, not breaking up numbers and minusing the units and tens and... Because there's different ways of doing subtraction.
Age.
So he's grade 3, plus minus. Grade 3, grade 4.
Okay. I can't, it's difficult to give advice on foundations that are missing.
Foundations that could be missing.
Because, you'd need to see what has the child done? How has he worked it out? Where is there a step that he's missing here? Is it because naught as a placeholder has been left out? Because that is a big one. So the child doesn't understand. If you are subtracting 23 from 50, now you've got to borrow a group of tens. So if Roxanne wants to perhaps ask that question and email us, then I could, with an example, then perhaps I could give her a little bit of a, better input. If he's a littly,
yeah,
No,
I
sorry,
would
carry on.
always, if I was with a child while they're doing their maths, I would say, explain to me what you're doing step by step, because let's say I can't do maths, I've never done maths in my life. So teach me how to do this sum. And you can then eventually, if they are struggling to explain what they're doing to you, you can normally see where their steps are maybe getting, broken down, or because you can't, unless you can explain to somebody else how to do something, you won't be able to do it yourself.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think that explaining, making the child the teacher and the parent the pupil, or the learner, is an excellent idea, because it gives the child, it boosts their confidence as well. At grade 4 level, there's a lot of solid foundation that is required for children to be able to use those basic concepts and those basic bonds. We mustn't underestimate the value of being able to add the basic bonds up to 10. Because if you know what 4 plus 3 is, if you've got 3,721 plus 2,105, you know straight away if you're doing them underneath one another, you know that 1 plus 5 is 6. So that will assist the child. So drilling those basic bonds, that is vitally important. That goes back to what we were saying earlier on about counting.
Fundamentals being there.
Yes. When it comes to subtraction, again, let them count backwards, because children struggle with that. So don't even start with 40, count back in groups of 1. 40, 39, 38. Start small. Start at 5 and count back until I tell you to stop. 5, 4, 3, stop. Now you give mom a number and tell me to count backwards. And if they give you a huge number, then you say, no, I don't understand that. That number's too big for me. Mommy doesn't know that. Give me a small number below 20. Because then they give you a number, then you can see, do they understand below 20? Because that below also is part of that.
Yeah,
that
there's that
terminology
vocabulary
they need.
again.
Yes.
Yeah. Which
Very
is our
important.
third one. Our third component is understanding concepts and understanding vocabulary around mathematics. So being able to understand before, after, between, sum of, divide, share, perimeter, area, all the sort of vocabulary and those concepts that we just expect the children to know, but they don't always understand. They also are not able to estimate or guesstimate number. So if you show them a whole bunch of beans in a jar or Smarties in a bottle and you say, how many do you think there are in the jar? They have absolutely no idea. Instead of being able to sort of look and more or less gauge and say, okay, I think there are about 70. So again, for primary school, how would you deal with understanding the concepts and the vocabulary around mathematics?
Phil, I think if you're looking at numbers, I just want to show the parents this. This is just a plain piece of paper that's been laminated. It doesn't have to be laminated. It can be a plain piece of paper in a folder. And the only reason I put it into the plastic is so that it can be used again and again. So when you are trying to help the children with that terminology and the concepts, let them write it. You can write it. Let them write it as well. So they can... Right, so you're drawing here. 1, 2, 3. So you will
You have to lift your page up a bit. There we go.
Okay,
Yeah.
you see it. Right, so the child can count 1, 2, 3. But for some children, if you put that, if you rearrange the dots in a different way, they
They know
struggle to tell
automatically
you that
it's
that
3.
is. Some do,
Okay.
but a lot of children, if they've
It
got
depends, like a
dyscalculia,
dice.
struggle.
Yeah. If they've
But-
used the dice a lot and they've been exposed to games where they've had to throw the dice,
Absolutely.
a different formation would
For-
throw them. So some dice, the numbers,
absolutely.
it's a row, sometimes it's a cluster.
You also get numbers, a die that's got the actual numbers on it. So you get big ones and you get little ones, and you actually get ones like this that have got +2, -3, and these are fantastic. And again, just go and get an offcut of wood somewhere.
And write the numbers on.
Write that on yourself, and then the child rolls it, and so you don't have to go and buy these. But using dice is a dice.
Play.
You've got 2,
Yeah.
and the child rolls it, and you can it can either be subtract, multiply, whatever you want to. You just have to be careful if you're doing division. Another thing that can be linked to that, for example, and this is just scrap pieces of paper that I've used. So if you have got, you can use it as a memory game. So you've got one house, and you've got the number 1. And this goes all the way back. Moms and dads, everything that Phil has discussed this evening They are all linked. So please don't see them as separate components. We're just highlighting a few specific things, but they are all linked, all interlinked in some way. So we can differentiate, but you can't really separate them. So you just make your own memory game. So the child sees this. This is a house, and this is number one. There's one house. So you put it face down, but just make sure that you've used something that doesn't see through the back. I promise you, they do have X-ray vision, and then they just cheat their way through the games anyway. They're very clever. So then you put it face down, and the child turns over the house. Now he's got to remember, where did I see the number one? Turns over, and he sees, oh, no, that doesn't match. That doesn't match. No, that doesn't match either. So have a sum or a number. There's a sum. So all of these can be used. There's the die picture that you were speaking about earlier on. So for whether you have it as looking like a side of a dice, or if you have the actual abstract number written down, it doesn't matter. As long as it can link to something else that matches. If it's 2 stars, it's got to match the number 2. If it's 2 stars, it's got to match the word 2. Because the children have great difficulty in matching those. They must know that the number 2 is the same as 2
The
pens.
word 2,
It's the same as the word 2.
Yeah.
So that they,
I think you've just highlighted something so important, Dan, and that is when you are doing homework, make it fun. Turn it into a game. Don't have it that it's something that the kids are anxious about or that the kids are dreading. Turn all these activities and things that you can possibly do, turn it into some kind of a game, or put something that they can relate to the work, so that it's relevant to their daily lives. So real objects, use real objects, help them to visualize, imagine. Kids have got the most incredible imagination. So teach them to imagine you're on an island and you've got to have 3 stones or whatever. Let them imagine that and teach them how to visualize when they're doing their work. And that applies to a high school child as well, by the way, not just a primary school child. Danny also spoke about making sure that they can write the word, that they can find the number on a number line, that they understand the place value of that number, and that they can quantify it. So is it more than 100 or is it less than 100? So do they understand where to find that number in a grid or in a number line? And then using daily situations like, okay, they want to go and buy some sneakers and the sneakers are on sale. Okay, well, what's the percentage off? If they're learning about percentage, they must understand that percentage off. If it's 25% off, what does that mean? So they have to be able to work that out, and let them use a calculator, but then they must understand the story behind it as well. So how did you work out 25%, and what does that mean when you worked it out? How much are you saving, and why is it a saving? And things like that. And I think that is why I love maths literacy so much as a subject. And we're going to talk a little bit about maths lit and maths core. But the thing with maths literacy, what I enjoy is that everything that they learn about in maths literacy is relevant to their daily life. It's things that they are going to have to do, whether it's working out a cell phone contract, or whether it's understanding how to book a flight, and how to work out time and money and budgets and ratios and percentage and fractions. It's all those things that we do on a daily basis. And I think there's a very negative sort of stigma attached to the maths lit subject. But I think that maths lit is far more valuable for the majority of students than maths core. Maths core has its place. If you're going to go into subjects that require maths core. But the general population that are just possibly going to be doing teaching or fashion design or anything in the creative line, or anything that doesn't require you knowing algebra and geometry and calculus, then maths lit is a fantastic subject. Thanks, Barbara. I'm glad you agree with what I'm saying. I sometimes feel like I'm on a soapbox, and I say to parents, "Why are you forcing them to do maths core? Why? What is so important about maths core? It's not the be all and end all. As long as they are able to get a good matric, it's pointless if they get a bad matric because they did maths core. Rather let them get a solid matric with a degree by doing maths lit, and then they can go and do marketing or whatever it is that they're doing. It just depends on what they're going to study. But I'm going off on a tangent again. We're running
Wait,
out of
stop.
time. We've got
Paul,
5 minutes.
I want to
Yes.
just very quickly say it's also very difficult for the kids when they are deciding on that maths core and the maths lit, because many children are not really, there's a world of opportunity, so they're not always really sure, what do I want to do and will I need maths? So I'd like the parents just to be aware of the fact that if your child has taken core maths and it gets to a point at high school, please don't wait until halfway through grade 11 or the beginning of grade 12. If you see sort of grade 10 level, you know what, end of grade 10, my child is really struggling with this now. Then approach the school, go to the teacher, because there are concessions that can be made, but if those are not going to help your child, rather look at the possibility of,
Alternatives.
yes, swapping
Well,
to
we
maths
say
lit.
at Elson Academy where I am, we say to a parent in grade 9, a child in grade 9, unless you're getting a solid 65% average in maths core, don't even consider maths lit. Even a 70,
Yeah.
you're going to struggle, and it's going to be stressful, and it's going to bring your marks down if you are doing poorly in maths. But that's my opinion, and like I said, it's my opinion. Number 4, the last concept that we're talking about, the last component is problem solving, the story sums. And these are the problems that the kids have to read. There's generally a little story, a case study behind it, and then they've got to decide, all right, what kind of an operation do I choose here? What's the algorithm? How do I solve this problem? And often kids who struggle in this department, they might have a reading problem, so they struggle to comprehend the problem. They struggle to identify which operation to choose because it doesn't make sense to them, and they don't know how to start. So they look at this sea of words on their page and they don't actually know how to start to break it down into manageable chunks. So Dan, and in terms of primary school kids, how would you explain to the parents, or what would you tell them how to help?
I would tell the parents to start with small numbers again. We tend to go into big number ranges because, my child is in grade 4, my child is in grade 6. They should know these. Yes, they should. But if they're struggling, they clearly don't. So use smaller number ranges and give them sums first. Give them a story sum. So you can say, Farmer Brown has 36 pigs, 28 cows, 14 chickens, and 80 goats. Calculate the number of livestock that he has. And that is where vocabulary, general vocabulary, comes in, because many children will just add them all together. But chickens are poultry, they're not livestock. So when you make the child aware of that, you show them this is what we are looking for. If you say, in January 2021, 25 grade 6 children had 36 Colleen crayons. By the end of the first term, every child had lost 2 crayons. How many crayons were left? The fact that it's 2021, that's a number that the children, they've got to know, I don't need that number. So take it out. So we need to also make them aware, when parents do this with the problem solving with them, make them aware of what is not
It's
necessary.
who, what, where. Yeah, I always say it's who,
Yeah.
what, where, why, how. So who are we talking about? What do you need to do? How are you going to do it? Where are they at school? And so they almost break up that problem into small little answers that they need to find first.
And moms and dads, it's easy for us to sit here and tell you these things because there's so
But we
many.
also have been moms. We also moms.
Exactly. Yes, we still
We've
are
also
moms.
been there with homework.
So we do understand that we're not expecting you to be teachers because then you're
No,
going to be
no.
sending your child to school. So we do understand that time is of the essence and it's limited and you're tired and you get home from work. And so
Yeah.
take the maths out of the homework environment as well over a weekend when you're going to the
When
beach
there's
if you
time.
haven't been. Yes, when there's time, if you go to the beach and you haven't been chased off the beach, then go and tell your child to find x number of shells or pebbles or
Yes.
something. How
Again,
many
make
of
it
them are broken?
relevant, make it
Exactly.
fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
Make it relevant, make it fun. Before we finish, the other issues that we have picked up again in our private practice and in being in schools is the maths anxiety. So the fact that I've heard kids say, "Oh, it's maths today." Oh, they have this aversion towards maths. It's become such an issue. They have stomach aches on the day that there's maths, or they want to go to the bathroom every 5 minutes while there's maths going on in the class. And I think maths anxiety is not something that we can just brush away. It is a real thing. The teacher plays a huge role in how the child either loves their maths or hates their maths. So teachers, if there are teachers watching, you have the most enormous power in having a child love the subject or hate the subject. It's all in your hands. If you are creating this anxiety and this stress and this sort of place where I don't feel safe. I can't ask a question because if I ask a question, I'm going to get told, oh, the eyes are going to be rolling at me, or everybody's going to sigh, or I'm going to feel like an idiot. So the atmosphere in the classroom, the environment in the classroom is key. And teachers, you have the power there. And the parents that are watching, your attitude towards maths as well. Again, if you are negative towards maths because of the experiences that you've had at school, that is going to brush off on your child as well. So what Danny and I have been saying the whole way through is maths needs to be something fun, needs to be something that you can explore together. We don't know everything that there is to do, everything that there is to know about maths. So if you as the parent are saying, listen, teach me, I don't understand this. Why don't you teach me? Let's work it out together. I think that's important. So Kiswa is saying, Danny, you're putting it so well, we should try to make maths fun. Exactly. That's exactly what we're saying.
It's got to be real. Yeah.
Yes, and maths core versus maths lit. We spoke about that earlier, so I'm not going to bring that up again. So parents, you have to keep a positive attitude. What Danny is saying is so true. Keep it very simple. Keep the concrete things there. Bottle tops, dice, real objects. If you have in the kitchen and you're dealing with potatoes and cutting the potatoes in half, apples, make it real. Concrete, remember, concrete is real things. Semi-concrete is the visual representation of that thing. So drawing it or having number grids. And then the abstract is, can you visualize it in your head? And can you do it in your head? The mental part of maths. Use calculators. Don't put them away. Use fingers if you have to. Let them use their fingers. They won't want to use fingers if they already have moved across to the semi-concrete. They're only using their fingers because they need them now. That is where they're at. That's their milestone. Concrete is the milestone. We will get them to semi-concrete and eventually, hopefully, to the abstract side. And then I love Khan Academy. I don't know if you've heard of Khan Academy, Danny.
No, I haven't.
Khan Academy. Khan Academy is a free website where you can sign your child up, and there are exercises and tutorials, and there are papers, exam papers. It is the most amazing free website that's available. And I think the bottom line, before we end off and ask if there are any questions before we finish, is don't stress too much about the maths. Don't stress too much. It's not the be all and end all, although it does follow our children all the way to matric. It's not the be all and end all. They just need to pass maths. I think it's a 30% maths core. If they're going to do maths core, yes.
Sorry, I just want to add in there that when the parents show their own anxiety, it rubs off on the child as well. You know, that if your child is nervous about making mistakes because they're struggling with maths, you as a parent, you're going to pick it up. So if your child is already has been using their fingers, they've been using concrete objects for so long, and you're thinking, I'm going to crawl up the walls, you should know this by now. Your child, you might find them put their hands under the table, and you'll see them looking down, and they're trying to count on their fingers without you
Yeah.
seeing it. Then you know your
Yeah.
child's anxious.
Yes.
And try and avoid that. Rather say to them, my precious darling Butterball, put your hands here on the table, and then let's count rather than make them really uptight about
Anxious,
it.
even
Because
more
then
anxious, yeah.
it's just going to cause greater anxiety for them in a classroom environment as well.
Exactly. In a classroom environment is where they need to perform. At home with you, they don't need to perform, they can be themselves. So Kiswa, it's Khan Academy, Khan Academy. You can Google it. It's free, like I said, and it's amazing. There's some other links as well that we're going to put in as well with the comments that we've found. I also want to say that both Danny and I do maths assessments. So if you are wanting to see how your child is faring in maths with all the other grade 4 children, if your kid is in grade 4, or grade 9 children, if your kid is in grade 9, both Danny and I do diagnostic maths assessments as part of our remedial consultancy business. And if you're wanting us to do an assessment on your child, you can contact us to do that. Next week, when we do this, not next week, 2 weeks' time, we're going to be doing reading. Next Wednesday, it's just going to be Q&A, dealing with this issue, just a quick 10-minute Q&A. So if you have questions next week, you can tune in with me next Wednesday. But the helpful links are that NWEA, which stands for Northwest Evaluation Association. You can Google them. It's their blogs, and there are all kinds of very amazing maths resources on there. And then you can also go to my PFEC Village. I'm going to repeat that. PFEC Village. And if you go to Guides and Guide 1, there is a screening for Dyscalculia. And we didn't really talk about dyscalculia this evening because it's quite a controversial issue. There's not a lot of research on dyscalculia, but it's the sister of dyslexia. So dyslexia is a problem with reading, and dyscalculia is a problem with numbers and thinking in numbers and maths. If you'd like to try a screening test, there's one for adults and there's one for children as well. So you can go onto my village, PFEC Village. It's on Facebook. And it's a group. You need to join the group and then go to guides, and you can see it in there. But just before we say goodbye, there's a little video about dyscalculia. That's a 19-year-old lady who has only just been diagnosed as having dyscalculia. And maybe as an adult, you see yourself in some of the things that she's saying. And I think if we understand our children better, the fact that she only identified that she had dyscalculia at the age of 19 is really quite sad, because there was so much that could have happened between then and when she was a little thing at school. But let's have a quick look, and then
My name is Josie Duncan, and I have dyscalculia. Dyscalculia is a learning disability that affects the way that our brains process numbers. Because of this, it's often described as number dyslexia. However, this term is too simple because it affects other things such as your sense of direction and ability to read maps, your left from your right, and your sense of time. So the combination of all of these things sometimes leads us to find simple tasks trickier and a wee bit more overwhelming than they ought to be. I'm a woman in her 20s who cannot read a clock. And I'm aware that this is so easy for other people, but to me it's just this circle full of numbers and lines and things are moving around. It makes absolutely no sense. Dyscalculia has been researched a lot less than dyslexia or ADHD, so it's likely that only the most severe cases, such as myself, are actually diagnosed. I was diagnosed with dyscalculia when I was 19 years old, and while I wish that I had received the diagnosis sooner so that I could have had help in school, I'm really glad to have the diagnosis now because I still get help with things in my adulthood, such as my tax return as a self-employed person. We live in a world that is completely full of numbers. From ordering a wee coffee, to a bus timetable, to entering your PIN, we come face to face with numbers so many times throughout our day-to-day lives. When I'm writing down a number, it's as though there's a pal beside me shouting out random numbers trying to put me off, but it's just my brain trying to reach the correct number. If you're wondering if you might have dyscalculia, see if any of this sounds familiar to you. You are terrible at maths, you struggle to read a map, clocks for some reason are just tricky to read. You took longer to learn your left from your right in school. You could not tell me how much a house or a car would typically cost. You sometimes forget people's names upon meeting them the once, even when you ought to remember. And anything to do with numbers is just a wee bit fear instilling. If this sounds familiar to you, then there is a chance that you might have one of the most underdiagnosed learning disabilities about. If you do have dyscalculia or just really struggle with maths and feel a wee bit isolated, just know that you are not alone. I once tipped 100% of a dinner, not because it was tasty, not because I'm lovely or rich, but because I put too many zeros in my calculator when I was just trying to tip 10%. Learning disabilities are so often associated with children, and to me this is really odd because they're rarely something that we grow out of. I also worry that this association can lead adults to feel a wee bit ashamed of having a learning disability, and there shouldn't be any shame in it at all. We can't choose the way that our brains are wired. If you relate to this video, it could be worth speaking to your GP or somebody at your school or college, because there might be help available to you that you don't even know about. And whether or not you do, it's always good to learn about the weird and wonderful ways in which our brains can work.
So there you have it. That is dyscalculia. And if you identify any of those issues that she was talking about that might apply to you or might apply to your child or your spouse, then pop along onto my village group and you can take a screening test. That is Danny's email address. Is that right, Danny? halleck@polka.co.za, not comma. halleck@polka.co.za. If you want to get hold of Danny, if you'd like to have an assessment, if you'd like Danny to have a look at your child, please contact her there. But it's been so awesome having you online with me, Dan, and hopefully we'll be doing reading. In 2 weeks' time, we're going to unpack reading, the challenges with reading, and how to help your child with reading.
Great. Thanks very much.
Thanks for being
I've
here.
enjoyed it, and
I'm so glad.
See you in 2 weeks.
And see you in 2 weeks. Thanks. There's one more comment just before we go. One more comment. Wow, Desiree from Swaziland. Awesome. I hope we were, it's great. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. And keep in touch and share this with everybody else that might find this interesting. And we will see you next Wednesday for Q&A. Have a good evening. Cheers, Danny, and cheers, everybody else. Good evening. Bye.
Bye-bye.